I'm wondering if you all can feel it, because I can certainly feel it. This is the last question in our Chapter 5 practice test. This was a long one, folks. A lot of questions, but, I think more practice is always better, especially something on probability, which tends to be a very... students don't tend to do well on this probability section. So anything we can do to make this better, more practice is always better than less practice. Of course, you have to know that by now. So let's read through this last question. A certain company sends 40% of its mail through company A1, 50% through A2, and 10% through A3. So that's all of their mail going to either one of these three companies. It's known that A1 sends 2% of the mail late, A2 sends 1% of the mail late, and A3 sends 5% of its mail late. Shame on you, A3. What's the probability that a randomly selected mail was delivered by A1 late? So, whoa, back up. We need to have a visual diagram for this, and the appropriate one for you to do is going to be your tree diagram. So let's make our tree diagram. The first thing that has to happen, is it going to be the mail sent late, or is it going to be we pick a company? Obviously, we're going to pick a company first. And it also is reinforced by the fact that we have single probabilities for all the companies. The probability of A1 is 40%. So unlike the other tree diagrams, this one is going to be a triple, a bird's foot for the first one. I like to say bird's foot because, that's what it looks like to me. We're looking at the footprint of a bird here. Okay, 40% are going to A1, 50% are going to A2, and 10% are going to A3. Now, there are two things that could happen once they get to the company. They could either be late or they could be not late. So we're going to go ahead and late and not late for each of these three companies. And gosh, I wish I made these a little bit longer. Late and not late. Okay, A1 sends 2% of its mail late, which means they send 98% of their mail not late. A2 sends 1% of their mail late, which means they send 99% of their mail not late. And A3 sends 5% of its mail late. Shame on you, A3, again. That means they send 95% of their mail not late. Okay, so this is a beautiful diagram because we have all of our outcomes, and all of our outcomes are disjoint. So to get any of the more complicated outcomes or events, we just need to add all of the outcomes that correspond to those events. So let's write down all of the possible outcomes. All right, we've got A1 and late, A1 and not late, A2 and late, A2 and not late, A3 and late, and A3 and not late. So I'm going to slowly do this first probability, and then we'll speed it up for the rest of them. So the first one is going to be going to A1 first, 40%, late, 2%, and so that probability is going to be a multiplication of those two outcomes along the way. So this is equal to 0.4 multiplied by 0.02, and I believe that's 0.008. The next one for A1 and not late. Well, let's do that in blue. Okay, we pass that 40% again, and then we make a right turn and we get to late. And so for the A1 late, we get 40% of 98%, which is 392. So we're going to do the same thing for the rest of these branches. We'll do that really quick. So you can see we've got all of these multiplied just by going down the lines of the tree diagram. And now we're ready to answer questions because we have all of the disjoint outcomes and the probabilities for all the disjoint outcomes. So for number 1, what's the probability that a randomly selected piece of mail was delivered by A1 late? And when you decipher that, that's the probability of A1 and late. Well, we have that probability right here, A1 and late, and it's 0.008. Now, if you wanted to, and I probably would recommend you do this, write down the multiplication. How did you get that number? We got 0.40% multiplied by 0.02%, and that's equal to that. You do need to show some work here, so writing down those multiplications would be the way to go. Next, for letter B, what's the probability that a randomly selected mail was late? So what's the probability of late? Okay. Since we have all the disjoint probabilities, we just need to list all of those disjoint probabilities that have an outcome that's late. And I did those all in yellow. So this is equal to probability of A1 in late plus the probability of A2 in late plus the probability of A3 in late. We have all of those probabilities. I highlighted them in yellow. So those probabilities are 0.008 plus 0.005 plus another 0.005. So all of the yellow branches added together are all of the outcomes that have to do with the late mail. And that gives me a 1.8% probability that a piece of mail is delivered late. Letter C. Suppose that a piece of mail was delivered late. What's the probability that it was delivered by A1? This part right here, suppose a piece of mail was delivered late. That is code for given the mail is late. So when I write my probability for this, I write down something given that the mail was late. Well, what is that something? We're trying to figure out the probability that a piece of mail was delivered by company A1. So we'll just put an A1 here. So what's the probability that something came from A1 and was late? Now that I have my tree diagram, the tree diagram lends itself nicely to using the formula. So we'll write down our formula for a conditional probability. We've got the probability of A1 and late divided by the probability of late mail. And luckily, we have both of those numbers. The probability of A1 and late is 0.008. The probability that we have a late mail, piece of mail, was 0.018. And when you divide those numbers, we get 0.4444. So that's all of it. I hope you can see that the tree diagram is really helpful for all of these. And we will see you next time. Good luck on your Chapter 5 test.